What's up guys, Doe here, and today I'm talking about a tier list for the elements for the weapons in Dauntless. Someone asked for this a long time ago, and it's going to be a weird video, which is why I haven't done it until now, but I'll start off by talking about it really simply, and later on I'll explain in more detail for my opinions on stuff, and I'll go into more clarification. But to start off, there are 6 elements. There is Fire, Frost, Terra Shock, Radiant, and Umbral, and there is Neutral, but that's not really an element. It's just the lack of having an element, I guess. It's strange. But talk about what is the best in slot, or my opinion of what's best in slot right now. In general, this would be general terms for right now, I'll explain it later. But fire weapons are best in slot in general, in my opinion. And for fire weapons, you have Hellion, Emmerman, and that's it, right? Yeah, that's it. You got 2 weapons. You got, wait, no, you got 3. I can't see. It's not really fiery. It's like orange. Anyway. You got Hellion, Emmerman, and Charog. Now, I'm not sure if you guys can put 2 together, but Charog is not very good. It doesn't really have a unique effect, and it also has some really meh slots. It's got Technique and Defense. Not the best combination, but you also have Emmerman, which has a part damage unique effect, and also has a Technique and a Feather slot, or Mobility slot, which isn't bad. It's actually not bad for Chainblade. It's not amazing, but it's not bad. So this is a decent weapon. But the bread and butter, which is what makes the fire weapons good, is going to be the Hellion Chainblades. These have 2 power slots, an overpower for the stat, and a very strong unique effect, which basically doing damage, or not doing damage, but hitting a behemoth with a certain amount of hits. We'll go ahead and say X hits. It varies for the weapons, but doing X hits will give you 250 damage and major blaze damage. And it's not just 250 damage, it actually scales up a bit based on your cells that give you more damage, your potions, using Drask Lantern, hold the cast. Anything that gives you extra damage will scale this a bit as well, making it do more damage. So Hellion weapons are really good for every single weapon. Not the best for every single weapon, but in general, it's the best, in my opinion, right? Now the next element I would pick is going to be Umbral, which I had to record this again because I missed this, but I would go with Umbral, and in this category you have 2 current Umbral weapons. You got Riftstalker, and you also have Shroud. Now at the moment, Shroud's not very sought after, just because getting to that 20% health to get usefulness out of the unique effect is just not very viable. It's not very easy to do. And for anyone that's upgraded their gear to say 550 or to plus 15 for all their gear, like all their armor, it's even harder to do. But you have the Riftstalker weapons, which the funny thing here is that Riftstalker weapons have a unique effect where dealing damage is a chance to give you even more damage. And you can have up to 40% extra damage based on your damage dealt to generate these shadow orbs. But the downside is you have something called Wild Frenzy, and Wild Frenzy is useful in low life builds, but again, low life is just not the meta right now. It's not the best for doing damage. You'd rather have flawless builds with Predator and those kind of cells. If you do low life builds, go ham, more power to you. But for the best builds right now that do the most damage, you want to have flawless builds. Like getting hit is sort of something that takes away time from your runs. So Riftstalker and Shroud are just good weapons in this category, and these are better suited for slow hitting weapons. Well, Riftstalker is for sure. Riftstalker weapons, if you're playing like the hammer or the axe, you want to be using this if you can. If you're fighting an Umbral Behemoth, then obviously don't use this. It's not a good idea. You don't want to be saying you don't want to be using the same element versus the same element. It's not normally a good idea to do that. But the hammer and the axe take advantage of the Riftstalker weapons based on just how they work. Now, Shroud weapons are still really strong, and they can be used. Like, I think the most useful fight for them, I would say, is probably Rezakiri, because for one, it's a Radiant Behemoth. Umbral is good against Radiant, and for 2, the orbs hit you hard as heck, dude. Like, you'll get hit so hard that in 2 hits, you'll be in threshold for 20%. And I think even with 550 gear. I can't remember exactly, but I remember I did a video where I fought Rezakiri using every single Shroud weapon. I used Shroud weapon for every single weapon, and it was relatively easy to get into the threshold if Rezakiri did bubbles first. So getting hit by 2 bubbles puts you in threshold, making these weapons really strong, and they are good in that sense. Now the next slot I would say, which is really good overall, is going to be Radiant. And the reason why is because both of the 2 current Radiant weapons they're viable, and that's a really important thing. You want to have For this kind of tier list, I'm looking at the things that have the most viability overall. Like that's the general and like easy way to explain it. So you have Valamir. Well, this is Rezakiri. You have Rezakiri and you have Valamir. We'll go to swords. I think it's easier to look at that. It's easier to look at it this way. So Rezakiri, Valamir. Now for Rezakiri, you have the Call of Dawn, which the name doesn't really matter that much, but Call of Dawn, you got +3 cunning, and the unique effect is a 10% chance for attacks to hit twice, as well as a technique and a utility slot. All this stuff is good. The cunning slot isn't that great right now. It's not bad, but it's not like, oh my god, you have cunning, bro, you're nuts. No one says that. It's okay. Because cunning right now, it got nerfed some time back to where it only gives you 10% chance to crit, and you also only get up to 180 crit severity, which before you had 200% crit severity off the bat. Like that's what you had. So that got nerfed overall. But it's nice because you have cunning on top of having a 10% chance for attacks hit twice, and that's a good thing. Now the Valamir weapons are a bit different, and they have +3 Aether Hunter, which isn't very viable on every behemoth. In fact, it's only really good on Shroud and Riftstalker because they don't really have a rage mode. Well, they have a rage mode or an enrage mode, but it's not really good for doing damage because when you boop them, they exit said mode. So that's the reasoning behind that. But the unique effect is once charged, your next attack deals 550 radiant damage. Charge rate increases based on max health. So you can increase this damage by using a cell called Tough. It's not like a crazy thing. It's like, oh, you have Tough plus the Valamir weapons, you're gonna hit for some insane number. That's not what's gonna happen, but it will make you do a bit more damage in having that, and Tough is good for survivability, so that's an option. But that's sort of why I'm picking this next, because both these weapons are strong and they're just both viable in a lot of ways. I wouldn't use Valamir weapons on anything but Riftstalker and Shroud at the moment. Instead, if I had to pick, I would use Rezakiri weapons. That's just where I would be at. Now, the next element that I would pick, I think I would go Frost. Wait, it's gonna be between Frost and Shock, and I'm saying that because when it comes to Frost, there's only really one like really good weapon that's Frost. It's gonna be Sword. But for Shock, you have more options. I'll say Shock's next, just because of the viability. So for Shock, you have three weapon choices. You got Stormclaw, Drask, and Nezaga. Nezaga's yikes. This is a yikes of a weapon choice, and by the way, I'm pretty sure it's different for each weapon. Where's you at? Yeah, so this has Savagery, and the unique effect is after Behemoth is staggered, heal for 300. And for the sword, you have Barbed and 5% lifesteal. Which is why this video is going to be a bit complicated. There are different cell slots, stats in some cases, and unique effects for the same weapons, for the same element, for the same behemoth. Or for different weapons of the same element of the same behemoth. So that's why it's a bit more complicated than just saying, oh hey, this is really good in this case, blah 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 blah. They vary to a degree. In some cases they vary very greatly. But anyway, it doesn't matter for the Nezaga weapons, this is just not very good overall. If you play it, play it. But in my opinion, which I can have that by the way, it's just not very strong. It's not in a good spot to do the El Damage, which is important. But what is pretty good, I would say for Sword, whenever this actually works, which right now it doesn't really work from what I can tell, I think that this would be a better option than the Drask. Mostly because when it comes to the swords, it's really good getting into Overdrive. Overdrive gives you more damage, it gives you more attack speed, I believe. I think. I should probably read the Overdrive. I'll put a link to the, or I'll put a snippet of Overdrive on the screen. But Overdrive just helps you out and makes you do more damage. It gives you more DPS, we'll say that. And getting to Overdrive faster is important, which this unique effect is after dodging to an attack, your next attack gains 200% extra meter, which on the sword isn't like 200% is good, and when it works, it's going to help out a lot. But on other weapons, it can be a bit better, just because you can actually charge. Like look at the axe, for instance. You can charge your attack to do more, to get more meter that way. So you can like charge your attack to get more meter, and then that meter you're generating will also be multiplied, or it'll be added to the 300%. So for the axe, this is nuts. For the sword, it's good too, and I think it's just better than this special because for the Drask weapons, you only get 30% damage versus tails, which sounds pretty good, but when you're playing solo, it's really hard to put a lot of DPS on the tails of pretty much every behemoth except for maybe Rezakiri, because Rezakiri is just all tail. It's basically just a floating tail. But for everything else, it's hard to hit their tail most of the time because they're normally facing you, making it rough. So I would think I would rate Stormclaws better, but that's just this. Now for other weapons like the axe and the hammer, which the axe I would still personally rock the Stormclaw weapon just because the meter gain is insane. It's freaking bonkers. But for hammer, I would go with Drask because you get 30% damage versus behemoth heads, and you also get a +3 Aetheric Attunement for this weapon, which is really strong. Now the defense slot, not very lucrative. It's not very appealing to me, but I'll take it because of the other effects. So if I had to pick, if say like Hellion weapons and Radiant weapons didn't exist, I would go with the Drask Hammer in this case. But for Axe and Sword, I would go with Stormclaw. Chainblades, I would go with Drask as well, just because this is not like you don't really need meter. Like meter doesn't really, like meter is useful, but you can generate enough meter to where it doesn't really matter too much. Warpike, I would go with Stormclaw. As soon as I can find the freaking thing. Stormclaw again. That's just what I would pick. Now, after Stormclaw, like after Storm Weapons, my next favorite element would be Frost. But to go into Frost, you have 3 Frost weapons. You have Boreas, Pangar, and Scrave. Now, for the sword, you have the Boreas sword, which is the second best sword in general. Like Hellion's the best sword, I think, at the moment. But then you have the Boreas sword, which if it had a better slot, if it didn't have this defense slot, I feel like it would be better than the Hellion sword, but who knows? Attack speed's kind of ridiculous right now. You can stack it really high, making the Hellion weapons better. But the Boreas sword is very good, mostly because you get conditioning, which helps out a lot. Like conditioning on the sword is a very useful perk to have. I normally bring conditioning all the time. Revirad, who is a really good sword player, almost always uses conditioning because it just helps out the sword immensely. But the special is using your special continually generates frost sprites that grant your next attack 50 or plus 50 damage and minor frost damage, max 4 sprites. Now these sprites, again, it's not just 50 damage. That 50 damage is also added on to, say, it's added to by having damage perks, or anything that gives you more damage will also increase this if it's real damage. And also you have reactive hit on the sword, which if you roll and do an attack, that attack will crit. That makes this just really strong. Like it makes this really strong, and it's continuously generating frost sprites during your special, which is why it's really good. Now for the other Boreas weapons, it's just not that good, because on the axe it's not bad, because whenever you charge the axe swings, you'll generate frost sprites when you're charging. So for a light attack, you can generate up to 3 if you do like just one swing. And then for your heavy attack, which is going to be left click is light attack, right click is heavy attack. That's how I refer to it. But for your right click, you can generate 4, and it does help out if you're fighting, say, like a fire behemoth for sure. It's just nothing that wild. And the conditioning also helps with the axe. But look at the hammer. You've got generate frost sprites on using ammo. You don't really use ammo that much, because on the hammer, you don't normally like prime and inline reload all that often. So it's not going to be that useful. Chain blades, you get 2 frost sprites for using a pip. It's just, you don't do that often to warrant it. And Warpike is probably the worst, where you get frost sprites for using a missile. If you have like a max missile, it'll give you 4 frost sprites. It's based on ammo quality. It's just not that. It's not that beneficial. Like it helps out, but it's not. It's not to the caliber of any of these other specials so far. Like this is just base damage. You just attack, you get more damage. Attack, you get more damage. Dodge, you get more meter. I feel like these are just better for, like, in most cases. Now, for the other frost weapons, you have Scrave, which Scrave weapons all have Nimble, I believe. I'm gonna go ahead and check. It's really strange how some weapons have different stats than others, but they all have Nimble. Now, the funny part is, right now, you have Nimble on every Scrave weapon, which Nimble is just rough. I feel like Nimble shouldn't exist because it doesn't really do much for you. I think that we should just either have agility on the weapons or conditioning, maybe fleet-footed, I don't know. Like, that's what I would do. But the unique effect is after dodging, drop 6 ice mines that deal 200 damage around you on a 30-second cooldown. Now, the funny part is, it's not the same unique effect for every single weapon. Like, for instance, for the sword, you get 3 mines. I'm not sure why, because the chain blades also get 6 mines. But it's a 30-second cooldown, dude. A 30-second cooldown. That's crazy. And the mine helps out, but it's just not very interactive. Like 30 seconds is just not. That's a long time. You can't like, oh, it's like dodging reduces the cooldown. Like it'd be interesting, I guess. Like doing something like that, or just changing it entirely. I don't know. But to me right now, this special or this unique effect is just not very interesting. And plus, the weapon has so you have nimble, which is a mobility cell, which isn't very good. You also have a technique slot and another mobility cell. So you basically have two mobility cells, one of which is completely useless. The other one could be useful depending on the weapon, but it's just rough. And the last thing is going to be Pangar weapons, which for the chain blades they have weighted strikes, which you don't really need anymore. You can still use it. If you use it, that's fine, but you don't need it anymore because you can just dash left click to interrupt behemoths now, which is very helpful. And I think that this has where's Pangar? I think this has Knockout King. I'd be wrong though. Yeah, KOK. This has KOK. And notice that the hammer, like most of the time, the hammer and the axe will have a lot of power slots, like a ton of power slots. Like almost every single axe has at least one power slot, except for Riftstalker. And the hammer is roughly the exact same thing. I think that's the major difference. Is like depending on if it's a hammer and axe, it's gonna have like very varying cells between like Warpike or Chainblades, Warpike, and Sword have different cell slots in some cases than Axe and Hammer. Just because of that. But that's sort of like where I'm at with that. And like the second to last, or like the last actual element, I would say, on this tier list is going to be Terra. So Terra weapons, you've got Koshai, Koshai, Karabak, and then Rockfall. Or Rockfall Skarn. These weapons in